Well, here we are again. My beloved viewers, my people just interested in the topic, my Anglo-Saxon enthusiasts that scrutinize my every word and watch me sleep at night. It's so good to have any of you. For the uninitiated, this series is an in-depth analysis of early English history that spans from a bit of Roman Britain, but mainly the Anglo-Saxons, up until being conquered by the Normans. This is episode 4. In the previous 3, I've been over the establishment of what we call the heptarchy, the basis of the political and cultural identity of the Anglo-Saxons. I guess you could watch this episode first, but if you don't turn around and watch the first 3, I will take it very personally. Today's episode will be about the period of domination by the central kingdom of Mercia. This was roughly between the years of 716 and 1825, and is the most obscure bit of English history that we've covered so far, sandwiched between the initial migrations and then the struggles with the Norse, both of which are much more strong in the public imagination. Mercian greater rule has a lot of interesting stuff to look at though. Matter of fact, this transitional period and underrated super kingdom is possibly the inspiration for the Anglo-Saxons' most well-known literary work, Beowulf, with various names like Beowulf and Wiglaf actually having matching names with prominent Mercian figures like Beornwulf and, well, Wiglaf. So, without further ado, this is the H&H Show. I'm your host, Russ Nell, and this is Origins of England, episode 4. Mercia was established in the misty years of the Anglo-Saxon migration and was primarily of Anglo origin. For most of the 6th and 7th centuries, Mercia languished in obscurity, sandwiched between rich Kent in the south and giant Northumbria in the north, and a whole lot of Celts to the west of them that really didn't want them there. Mercia spent its time feeling sorry for itself and kicking an empty can down the road. Well, that's when its neighbors weren't shaking it upside down for spare change, that is. That was until Penda of Mercia obtained the throne in 626. Penda was a historical dual threat. One, he was the first ambitious Mercian king. He greatly expanded westward into the Celtic frontier, as well as encroaching into Northumbria. But secondly, and most famously, Penda was the last prominent pagan king of the Anglo-Saxons, holding out against the sweeping tide of Christianity, making his aggressive rise to power and resistance against him a much more existential affair. Mr. Penda was said to have quoted this on the matter. "No, guys, what? Are you forgetting who you are? We're descendants of Woden. We don't go to Sunday school. We swallow fire and make sacrifices. What's happening to everything decent and noble? What are we, heretics? Or gods forbid Greeks?" He didn't say that, I made that up, but he could have. But Northumbria was just baptized by the Celtic Church and working with a convert zeal, so they spared no expense in stomping out this pagan menace. Therefore, the Mercian army faced a crushing defeat at the hands of Northumbria in 655, taking Penda's life along with it. Due to the religious implications of the conflict, Northumbria broke against precedent and outright conquered Mercia and dissolved it. Usually it would just be forced into a status as a vassal state. And just like that, Mercia is no more. It's just a territory for Northumbria. They're not gonna rebel or anything, right? Why is the next 100 years called the Mercian period again? That's right, turn right back around and draw Mercia back on your map because you can't keep a young Mercian hustler down. In 658, Penda's son Wulfhere led a rebellion against Northumbrian dominance and re-established Mercia's presence as a political identity, really only after 3 years of timeout. Most helpfully though, Wulfhere had converted to Christianity, unlike his father, making Mercia's existence at least tolerable. Following the exploits of Wulfhere, Mercia was restored to its status as a member of the Heptarchy, but nothing terribly far beyond that. But it started to heat up a bit with the reign of Ethelred of Mercia, Wulfhere's successor, who began to menace the kingdoms surrounding them. In the Battle of Trent in 679, Mercia crushed Northumbria and seized territory in the form of the minor kingdom of Lindsey. This is when it was clear there were two great English powers rather than one. Mercia was on the rise, and it wasn't playing nice. But it was in the year of 716 that the first figure of true paramount importance entered the stage. Ethelbald of Mercia was just another exiled noble, probably beating up someone in an alley or selling narcotics or something, or living as a brigand, typical exiled Anglo-Saxon noble stuff. When he was approached by a hermit named Guthlac, Guthlac told him he received a prophecy that Ethelbald was destined to rule. While not having grand ambitions prior, this prophecy sparked them, and the exile began to make moves against seizing the crown of Mercia. At first, I'd say Guthlac needed to be dragged to jail for a prophecy that would get the gold medal for instigation. Like, dude, come on. But I dragged that man out of jail and dress him down in silk after a few years. Because with Ethelbald seizing the throne, the golden age of the kingdom has begun. The specific details of Ethelbald's reign are about as clear as the memories of a night owl. All that's confidently known is that he was influential and everybody talked about him, as well as frequently warring with Wessex and Northumbria, the other two frontier kingdoms, as well as the Welsh, the so-called frontier. He also had a notably close and out of the norm alliance with King Angus of the Picts. The status of Ethelbald of Mercia as an outright Bretwalda is tenuous and up for dispute, but the surviving Ismir diploma of 736 places him at the same rank as historical other great Anglo-Saxon kings. Not only that, Ethelbald even had enough covert influence to spread into the realm of religion, and the Council of Clovisho in 746 credits him as being a significant part of church reform, and matters we will unpack in much further depth here in a bit. Bede actually ends his storied tome Ecclesiastical History talking about Ethelbald, as Ethelbald's day in the sun was contemporary to his time. Bede makes it no secret that the Mercian king was the most powerful man of his day, and this would be an anxious fact, seeing that Bede was from Northumbria and always had the prospect of Mercian aggression breathing down his neck. But that's right, from this point forward we are Bede free. What a legend, a genius, torch in the dark. If you were born now, you might have been some kind of eccentric computer scientist that made the code for self-guiding rockets and told everyone that you received the numbers and sequences as visions from God. Thanks for all your hard work. That said, yes, Bede kicked the bucket during Ethelbald's reign in 735, but we're not quite done with him yet, because before that happened, Bede actually has some surviving letters of him getting involved in the issues of his day, which serves as a tidy transition. With other details unavailable, the highly litigious church maintained the most concrete details of Ethelbald's reign in the form of church drama. Through this, we have to take what we can get and extract some key events as well as political life. So, according to Bede, Ethelbald had direct oversight over 12 bishoprics in England, while Ceolwulf of Northumbria had oversight over the other 4. The will and whims of the powerful kings and the daily decisions and responsibilities of the church were somewhat tied, much to the churchmen's constant, ceaseless friction and chagrin. A little second or so ago, I mentioned that Ethelbald hosted the Council of Clovisho in 746 with the help of Archbishop Cuthbert, and that council was on the subject that was putting many a churchman in a foul mood: the secularization of monasteries. Royal land charters were usually expected to be of some sort of religious nature, but not everyone wanted to live in a godly manner. Some people wanted to party and disturb the peace, especially the type of people that Anglo-Saxon kings owed favors to. like a nobleman with a pile of bodies behind him. So the king would issue them a charter and just save face by it technically being for the purpose of building a family monastery. And just like that, you have about 1,000 Gothic monasteries all across the land. The conduct of the Mercian nobles infesting all the monasteries across all the kingdoms was universally hated. And even taking out the foreign conqueror thing, Bede in a letter to his colleagues dated shortly after he finished ecclesiastical history complains about secular monasteries in his own home kingdom of Northumbria. What really irked Bede is that all the land being tossed out to these dress-up monasteries were not even subject to the authority of the bishopric, rather the owner's family, so it just outright sapped strength from the church, not to mention giving the faith a tacky look. And Bede pragmatically went on about, my gosh, what about the army? Like, dude, putting the politics of the church aside, like, we need more provisions and barracks for the army. All of the good land is going to these dens of sin rather than soldiers. Meanwhile, Mercia is looming ominously over the horizon and only getting stronger. Oh yeah, and all of this coming from a guy who lived in a monastery. You know it's bad when a monk is like, alright guys, chill out with the monasteries. There are plenty of accounts on the specific behavior of the Mercian monks and abbesses who occupied them. Most famously in a letter from Saint Boniface, who was acting as a missionary in Germany and displayed outright disgust. Boy howdy, those guys and girls must have been up to no good if a missionary all the way in Germany hears about it. They also behaved as economic parasites. Oftentimes the family would quietly fold any profits made from the monastery into their own private wealth. I mean, I assume a good monastery is supposed to use it to aid the sick and poor, and also hide personal wealth and invest personal wealth into said monasteries to evade taxes, so therefore depriving funds from the kingdom. And to really pile on, these were granted by inalienable charters. Inalienable charters meant that the land no longer belonged to the kingdom, rather the kin of the person who's on the document, indefinitely and not taxed. So therefore, all these monasteries were irreversibly bleeding the state. All of this backlash and hate mail and unrest resulted in Ethelbald capitulating in the Council of Clovisho and allowing the Archbishop of Kent, the most storied and legitimate religious center of authority in England, to be allowed to monitor and regulate monastic life. Okay, so what else? Well, we don't really know anything about Ethelbald's expansionist or military exploits. However, peeking through the blinds of the ecclesiastical drama, you could kind of piece together that the guy had a terrible reputation. I mean, just one example, in that letter from 745 from Saint Boniface in Germany, began to start railing against Ethelbald for his constant fornicating with nuns. Come on, Ethelbald, I know those monks and nuns are just your battle buddies and side women that you gave a place to stay, but dude, have some class. Ethelbald, a successful king nonetheless, reigned for the longest time in Anglo-Saxon history, beginning in 716 and holding the throne for a total of 41 years. But alas, even as an old man, your enemies can catch up to you. And in 757, the aging Ethelbald was ambushed and skewered to death by his bodyguards for an unspecified reason and buried in a Roman-style mausoleum in Repton. The only surviving contemporary remark about his sudden passing is a report of someone receiving a vision of him in hell. Alright guys, we get it. So in the power vacuum left by Ethelbald on the Mercian throne, it was filled by this wannabe named Bjornred, who in all likelihood called the hit in the first place. But the only information that we got on him is that the people hated him. Bjornred the buffoon was regarded so poorly that in fact there's evidence that the commoners and nobility alike rose up in rebellion to install a new king at their head named Offa, another man of noble blood, albeit distantly related to the sitting line. Offa easily deposed Bjornred and became king in 757. And wow, guys, y'all should really, consult the people more often for the selection of rulers, because Mercia has hit the jackpot once again, and in the biggest way that we've seen so far. The latter half of 8th century Anglo-Saxon England is defined by the reign of King Offa of Mercia, arguably the first real king of the English. From his own home base in central England, Offa staved off Northumbria and completely swept through and crushed the south, vassalizing most of the kingdoms and making submissive allies of both Northumbria and Wessex. Does any of the details of this massive political and military upheaval going from 7 kingdoms to kinda just sorta 2 or 3 survive? No, of course not. Don't you dare ask me again. But the juxtaposition between his dominance and, how little we know makes Offa kind of a shadowy arch-king. Consensus amongst historians if King Offa was a real king of the English is split. But there are certainly contemporary accounts that outright call him king of the English, and that has to count for something, right? Part of what makes it so difficult is the fact that due to a couple particularly damaging fires, very little Mercian annals or other documents survive. Rather, the sources that we have to use are typically written afterwards and written by Mercia's enemies, chiefly Wessex and the Welsh, who have very few kind or level-headed words to say about the king who beheaded their grandfather. Wessex was the largest contributor to Mercia's eventual downfall, and they were the ones that wrote the questionable but important Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is not helpful. Also, it was written in the 890s, a century or so later. Also not helpful. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, there are only 7 entries on Offa, and the Mercians are generally dismissed. The most visible aspect of Offa's legacy is Offa's Dyke, as it still survives all the way up to today. It's a massive public works project for its time, a 285 kilometer, 7.5 meter tall packed earth barrier that extends roughly the English and Welsh border. And it was most likely a deterrent to the feared Welsh cavalry. The second most famous legacy of the Shadow King Offa is his miraculously preserved letter with the Frankish king Charlemagne. Charlemagne is more or less early European Middle Ages main character and put the non-Mediterranean European people on the map. Carolingian dynasty, Carolingian Renaissance, driving the steppe tribes out of the west, preventing the caliphate from spreading, making the Eastern Roman Empire finally regard Western Europe as slightly above barbaric hordes of hooligans. And he and Offa were pen pals. Matter of fact, in the letter between Charlemagne and Offa, Charlemagne refers to Offa as brother. And this is the only time that the macho Frank is recorded as doing this. There's further signs of close ties between Offa's Mercia and the Carolingian Empire. For example, Mercian coinage phasing out of gold content for silver coincides with the exact same trend in Francia. Matter of fact, there's substantial evidence that the design of Charlemagne's coinage was based off of Offa's coinage, which was minted earlier, which is a great look if it's true. I mean, what if you're shooting hoops in college ball and LeBron James starts copying your shots? It's nearly a given, that the Mercian government apparatus was parallel to that of the Carolingians. In the past, as with the Northumbrian Bretwaldas, the Mercian greater rule was considered uncentral or nominal or unadministered or unenforced. But with the continuation of the excavation of Offa's Dyke and finding more preserved charters and finding more coinage, this notion is called into question. I mean, I've just about said this 1,000 times in this series, but it just wasn't well recorded to us. However, the Carolingian dynasty was very well preserved, and all of the scholars give that one a big gold medal for being a trailblazer. So if Mercia and the Carolingians were so mutually influential, with the Carolingians sometimes even being influenced by Mercia, you could come to the conclusion that Mercian England was pretty strong indeed. However, we can't get carried away and take this too far for the sake of saying something new. Like, yes, the direct gears of government may have been in a unified character across most of England, but the ruling philosophy of Mercia was not one of many different parts to one whole or national unity. Rather, a strong kingdom that reigns supreme and bosses around the other kingdoms. Like, no, we are not one united nation of England or one great united kingdom. We are the awesome kingdom of Mercia, and all the other little kingdoms do our laundry because they got no choice. In the words of historian Simon King, Offa was driven by a lust for power, not a vision of English unity. What he left was a reputation, not a legacy. We could get a look at Offa's Mercian mentality with the survival of charters and their disputes, yes, but also with royal decrees of labor. With Ethelbald's gamely privilege being a good surviving example, kings were perfectly within their right to put their subjects to conscripted work on public projects, as long as it was in the realm of defense for the kingdom. Although there were limits to these edicts and the power that they carried. Mercians had a habit of treating large monasteries as sources of both free labor and food with little regard. An example of this is after endless complaints, later King Canwulf of Mercia granted immunities to the Izmir monastery in 816, which stated that they were no longer moved to feed the king's army and his animals. However, they were still required to assist with public defense projects. Monasteries were an obvious, easy target for conscriptions of goods and services, as they both grew and processed their own basic goods and artisan goods. Your first thought might be, well, good. It's about time those do-nothings do something. But unfortunately, said do-nothing monasteries only had a few people in them, and people that the king wanted to keep happy and out of the way. Whereas the genuine and well-established monasteries had much more industrious potential. So the parasitic monasteries got to just lounge around, and the real monasteries were worked around the clock. That was until the monastery put up enough of a fuss to hurt the king's public image. Offa and other Mercian kings were known to act outside the expected reach of a king and land charters as well. In a case that involves specifically Offa, King Egbert of Kent granted an inalienable charter to a layman for one reason or another. This layman decided to grant this charter to the Christ Church of Canterbury, likely for a monetary settlement, in which he was in his right to do. But before you gentlemen shake hands, here comes King Offa. He's been drinking. Oh, no. King Offa swooped in and seized the land and doled it out to his followers. When approached about this and its injustice, Offa supposedly exclaimed that King Egbert of Kent had no right to issue land charters in the first place, seeing that he was just his mere minister. It would be a different story if Offa seized the land and then slapped King Egbert in the wrist and said, yeah, sorry to hurt your feelings, man, but you're in a central system now. And decisions of state gotta be filtered up the chain of command and through the bureaucracy because, you know, that's how this whole central government thing works. But no, he doesn't do that. He just calls Egbert a punk, mocks his accent, and then doles out the land to his cronies so they could sit around and smoke hash until 3 in the afternoon, not even bothering to get dressed. Not exactly what you would call brilliant statecraft. In one way or another, the Christ Church eventually regained this land, but only spoke of Offa and their referendums poorly. Well, smoky rain in the rear view mirror, Offa had one heck of a ride and passed away in 796. Most likely due to natural causes. You know, he was a powerful man. To be an Anglo-Saxon king with that many enemies and have his life end in bed and not at the end of a blade. And look, Offa had enough power to name his son Egfrith as an heir to inherit the throne. A bit of a rarity in Anglo-Saxon England. King Egfrith of Mercia, son of King Offa of Mercia, ruled between the years of 796 and 796. Yeah, he didn't last long. Egfrith was usurped by his distant cousin Coenwulf, but the fate of the crown prince is pretty sad. By all accounts, he was a decent and promising prince, but Offa, in order to secure the ascension for his son, purged everybody in the kingdom of noble blood. Of course, he inevitably missed a spot, and that spot being Coenwulf's distant branch. And the only thing that this act did was make enemies and heavily taint the young prince's ascension to the throne. The failure of all of Offa's efforts points both to the weakness of the Anglo-Saxon system, as well as the fickleness of the type of brute force, personal power Offa wielded. To quote a letter written by Alcuin dated to 797 on the matter, quote, Egfrith had not died for his own sins, but the vengeance for the blood his father shed to secure the kingdom reached the son. The regicidal cousin that did this dirty work, Coenwulf of Mercia, ruled from December 796 to 821. He was the last king on the Mercian throne to maintain some form of their supremacy. Coenwulf's reign is marked by the slow but sure disintegration of Mercian authority in the south. The kingdoms were just plain sick of the Mercian nobles treating their land like a nightclub. It began to provide rebellion and sporadic bouts. The chief hotbeds were Kent, Essex, and especially Wessex. If we don't know much about kings that were a huge deal, like King Ethelbald and then King Offa, then yes, we don't know anything about Coenwulf, the likely passable but not spectacular. Besides the uncovered coin or two, all we know is that he stayed alive and held up the status quo, all as it was kind of slowly deteriorating. Coenwulf was competent enough to keep it all from collapsing, but not great enough to continue domination. Coenwulf of Mercia died in 821, most likely of natural causes. And Mercian kings dying in bed as a servant reads them a hero saga is not a trend that is going to continue. Mercia then went through a merry-go-round of usurping kings between 821 and 827 that really began to just throw all of the kingdom's accumulated power into the wind. The first king post-Coenwulf was King Ceolwulf, who was actually the late king's biological brother. Was dear brother the one that Coenwulf wanted to take the throne? Well, no, the throne briefly went to Coenwulf's son, but Uncle Ceolwulf skewered him and took it for himself. If I was an Anglo-Saxon king on my deathbed, I'd send my son to Byzantium or something. Because why even try? However, dear uncle didn't last very long, with his reign only being from 821 to 823. This is when Mercia's power really fell apart. The other kingdoms started not returning Mercia's call, and the Welsh really began to give their border some problems. In 823, Ceolwulf was usurped by a guy named Bjornwulf of relatively obscure background, and spoiler alert, but his reign was just terrible. So now enter Wessex, stage right, because it's going to be a big deal from now on. Back in the glorious days of Offa writing to his buddy Charlemagne, one of the main sticking points in the letter was Charlemagne assuring Offa that he had the English nobles fleeing to Francia under control. While Offa was most likely concerned about nobles more directly related to Mercia, a Wessex noble by the name of Egbert was able to slip under the radar. In 802, when the Wessex king died, Egbert rushed back to seize the throne. While this wasn't a massive deal right then, a big sticking point for the Mercian court of Coenwulf is that the upstart king did not seek the Bretwalda's approval. But yeah, Egbert was in no mood to ask some Mercian has-beens approval. This upstart king had big dreams indeed. Now let's skip ahead to where we were in 823 with the usurping flavor of the weak king of Mercia, Bjornwulf, in power. King Egbert of Wessex has been a constant nuisance to Mercia since he took the throne. And he was committed, not only in his own right, but also funding, supporting, and instigating other vassal kingdoms to rebel as well, and with increasing regularity. It all came to a head in 825, with Egbert finally feeling confident that Mercia was ready for the killing blow. And this blow was the Battle of Allandun at Rotten in Wiltshire. I should have looked up how to pronounce them. Egbert led a concerted Wessex force to completely crush the Mercians with devastating losses for the formerly supreme kingdom. Following breaking their army to pieces and blowing them away like a dandelion, Egbert of Wessex swept through the south, conquering a majority of Mercia's former territory. Unfortunately for Mercia, most kingdoms welcomed Wessex with open arms, as Wessex sweetened the deal by promising them much more independence. Somehow, Beornwulf survived to London, but would meet his end only a year later in a Wessex-instigated rebellion. The age of Mercia was over. The age of Wessex had begun. So, there you go. In a couple of different ways, the Mercian period is the height of Anglo-Saxon culture in its purest sense, in its purest manifestation. During Wessex times, the trauma response to the Norse incursions would greatly alter Anglo-Saxon society. The naming conventions, the societal structure, the saga aesthetic, it all just kind of faded away, and is what makes the Mercian Anglo-Saxon England and the pre-Mercian Anglo-Saxon England sort of feel foreign or distinct or alien. But while not being part of the narrative, I'd like to end this video with a little observation that jumped out at me during research that I could kind of slip through the cracks through all the exoticism. With the English Renaissance as well as the Enlightenment, there came to be born an idea that is very important to modern Western political philosophy: liberty, or the rights of the individual. In England, the Glorious Revolution in 1688 had the constitutional monarchy established, with the Parliament being held to limit the powers of the monarch. The culture of individualism and the belief that the king must be counterbalanced by the will of his subjects is how Enlightenment thinkers separated themselves from the barbaric and despotic medievalism of their roots. The political actors in England, and by cultural reverberation the United States, who used these principles to vastly alter the world, credits the idea to the Roman Republic of old. English and American thinkers made an effort to break from archaic medievalism, which was a subject of a weird mix of nostalgic reverence and self-degrading scorn, to embrace the philosophy of the Roman past. They saw the England of Richard the Lion as a vessel of abstract despotism and a fall from grace. They then, after making this proud revelation, boarded a bunch of boats and forced Anglo supremacy across the world. But ironically enough, I don't think they gave their ancestors enough credit. Now, note that what I'm about to say especially doesn't apply to the people that they saw as a racial other, another socio-political concept that the Anglo-Saxons were bizarrely modern about. Yang, to this point, yin, I suppose. But yeah, Anglo-Saxon England in like the age of Mercia and unadulterated by the outside world was not despotic. It was violent, it was dangerous, it was unstable, and it was poor. But no, I don't think it was despotic. It's interesting to see. In their unstandardized and sporadic charters and edicts, in an unstandardized and sporadic world, the basis of power could be completely abstract and without explanation. But for some reason, the rights of both subjects and sovereign states were a critical rule to uphold. Like, you could look around and see that you don't need to like answer questions to the press on why you took the land from that guy. You have the most like powerful army of dudes with broadswords in the entire country, and he doesn't. Like Cornwolf, you don't have to like offer up like limitations and balances of what you can and can't tell specific monasteries to do. Like it's like you just don't have to really do that. Look at the Sui dynasty in China, somewhat contemporary to them. They would put hundreds of thousands of people to building projects with a mortality rate of up to 50%. Why even lose sleep over the extent of your authority? What's all this objection and drama about King Offa infringing on this one conquered weakling's, this one guy's individual property rights? Missionaries could outright write letters to the supposedly most tyrannical kings and dress him down for his personal conduct, and his response was to sheepishly call a council. Wulfstan was frustrated with nobles just coming and grabbing power and said that it's proper that kings must be chosen by priests and the people. King Offa's legitimacy rested not on any sort of blood relation, but on the will of a rebellion. And across England, his legitimacy and right to rule was not once called into question. However, his right to tamper with a single guy's property was called under heavy scrutiny. Curious indeed. Pre-Norse Anglo-Saxon England seemed to have a self-destructive obsession with grappling with individual rights, although it was never covertly identified as a concept. You must tread carefully around the rights of that kingdom that you just conquered. You must tread carefully around the rights of that monastery. You must tread carefully around the rights of that guy. Ironically enough, Anglo-Saxon England would have likely been much better off if it just stepped on some toes for the sake of cohesion in the realm. But they just wouldn't do it. Even the most supposedly tyrannical kings would have to offer statements and explanations and more statements for overreaches that, in the grand scheme of things, are mere child's play in the field of despotism. So, English liberty may credit the Romans for these principles because it's easier to pin down and far more fashionable. But there's a possibility that it natively runs in the social fiber that influenced the development of English political thought. Just quiet and very subconscious. Listen, I think about the Roman Empire too much for my own good, and know of it extensively. But the misty and forgotten little Anglo-Saxons might have shown a more modern deference for political and personal rights than their supposed Roman betters. Alrighty guys, alrighty. So, next time, it's gonna be, I know it's gonna be about Wessex this time. I assume it's gonna be about the Viking War, when the Vikings start showing up. I'm like 80% sure. Something like that. Thank you guys for watching today. Thanks as always, even if it gets just a couple views, it's always worth it, man. This stuff's awesome. That said, please help a young man out. A sub is all you gotta do. But if you're feeling more giving, I got a Patreon in my description, in my pinned comment, and in the details of my channel, I believe. So please, throw a couple coins my way. What do you think? Did I get anything wrong? Did I get anything really, really right? Leave me a comment. I ain't a celebrity. I'll see it. I'll see your comment if you leave it. Take care. Till next time. Ciao.